Hey everyone, it's time for the next instalment of my Piano Questions Answered series, and today I'm going to try to answer a question from YouTuber Rob26B. Now Rob says, if you're soloing with a pentatonic scale, can you still play the notes that are omitted from the scale in the harmony? For example, can you play a chord that contains one of the notes omitted from the scale? Let's just clarify that a little bit. What I think Rob is getting at here is the fact that one of the ways we construct pentatonic scales is by taking a full major or minor scale and missing out certain notes. So there's C major and there's C pentatonic, and as you can see, some notes are missing. I'll go into exactly which ones later. So what Rob is asking is those notes that we've missed out when we're building the pentatonic scale from the basic major scale, can we use them in the harmony? The short answer is yes. Okay, now the long answer is a bit more technical, so what I'm going to do is give you a quick refresher on pentatonics, what they are and how they work, and then talk about their relationships with the kind of common chords we find in song progressions. Now, a pentatonic scale, in the broadest sense of the term, is any scale that contains 5 notes. And there are lots of them, yeah? Pentatonics exist in pretty much every musical culture throughout the world. They are universal. But in the context of Western music, and especially when we're talking about genres like pop and jazz, when we refer to pentatonic scales, we usually mean one of two, either what we call the major pentatonic or the minor pentatonic. Okay, so the first one I played there was the C major pentatonic scale, and the second one was the A minor pentatonic. And you might notice that they share the same notes: C, D, E, G, A, C, D, E, G. Same notes, just when we play it as major, we start in one place, and when we play it as minor, we start in the second place. And each one has 5 distinct notes: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we're back up to the start again. Okay. Now, if we think about those two scales relative to the 7-note major and minor scales, we can see that the major pentatonic is made up of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th and 6th degrees of the major scale. Okay, so that's our full 7-note major scale. Okay, and that is the pentatonic. We've got 2 notes missing. Likewise, when we look at A minor pentatonic, we can see that it's made up of the 1st, 3rd, 4th, 5th and 7th notes of the full natural minor scale. Okay, to keep things simple in this tutorial, I'm just going to focus on the major pentatonic. Okay, so here, just to go over that again, here's the regular C major scale: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and back to 1. It's what we call a heptatonic, a 7-note scale, although just to make things extra especially confusing, we usually refer to it as a diatonic scale. Let's not go there, okay, but I'm just going to call it the regular C major scale. So the C major pentatonic is 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. Okay, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th and 6th degrees of the regular major scale. So you can think of it as the major scale, but without the 4th and 7th degrees. Now that doesn't mean that the major pentatonic is just a cut down version of the regular major scale, although that's how we tend to use it. Okay, we'll come on to that in a second. The pentatonic scale, any pentatonic scale, is what we call tonally complete in itself. You can make music from it, you can build harmonies from it, whatever, just using the notes of the pentatonic, both the major pentatonic and the minor pentatonic. But in the Western European musical tradition, we tend not to have purely pentatonic music. But what we do a lot is mash up bits of pentatonic, especially in melodic lines, with diatonic chord progressions. Now, the useful thing about pentatonic scales, if you're improvising, is that they always offer you a good degree of safety and stability. Let's say you're improvising on a song in the key of C major. Now, as long as the chords you're improvising over are diatonic, they're natural to the key of C, and in most songs in C major, most of the chords will be, then the notes of the pentatonic are almost always going to sound okay over the top. Doesn't matter which pentatonic notes you're playing, as long as you're playing notes from the C major pentatonic scale and you have natural diatonic chords of C underneath them, it's going to sound pretty reasonable. Some combinations will sound better than others, but you're not going to get anything that really jars. Let me just show you what I mean. So all I was doing there was over that C major chord progression, purely using the notes of the pentatonic scale and not worrying too much about which notes I was playing over which chords, because I knew the pentatonic would keep me fairly safe. So how does that work? Why do pentatonics always sound more or less okay? Let's go back and think about their relationship to the basic major and minor scales. I'm going to focus on the major. As I said, the minor uses exactly the same principles. Now in the 7-note major scale, the different notes have different levels of what we call tonal stability. The tonic note, the first degree, is the most stable tone. Okay, so C in the key of C major. C is kind of home. When we get there, the music doesn't try and drag us anywhere else. After the tonic note, the 3rd and 5th degrees of the major scale, E and G in C major, are the most stable tones. And as you can see, those are the other 2 notes of the C chord, the tonic chord. And these stable tones are kind of like magnets. When a piece moves away from them, then as long as the key doesn't change, they're always kind of trying to pull the melody and the harmony and whatever else is going on. They're trying to pull them back to those very stable tones. Now the 2nd and 6th degrees of the scale, D and A in the key of C major, are less stable. In some way they kind of want to take us somewhere else, but they're each a whole tone away from the notes next to them in the scale. Okay, in C major that's easy to visualize because D and A have both got black notes either side of them. Yeah, and those black notes are kind of insulating them from the notes around them, so they are less stable than C, E and G, those very stable tones, but the 2nd and 6th degrees of the scale are still quite unstable. Now the 4th and 7th tones of the major scale, F and B in C major, the tones missing from the pentatonic, are the least stable tones of the major scale, and hopefully you can see why. Each one is right next to a very stable tone, so F is next to E and B is next to C, and they're just a semitone, just a half step away. There's nothing between those very unstable tones and those very stable tones, so they have a very strong pull towards them. B wants to take us to C, F not quite as strong with F to E, but F does want to take us to E. As I say, the pull off that B is really strong. We call the B the 7th degree of the major scale in whatever key you happen to be in. We call it the leading tone because it really wants to take us up to C. Now interestingly, if you know a bit of music theory, you'll know that the 4th and 7th, the relationship between them is what we call a tritone. That's the interval between them. 3 whole tones, 3 whole steps. Okay, and a tritone is a really unstable interval that's kind of at the heart of the way Western music works. It's the interval that gives the dominant 7th chord. There's G7, its power. And can you hear how the tritone really wants to kind of drag outwards to those stable tones? So if we use a pentatonic scale in an improvisation or in part of an improvisation, we're actually doing a very clever thing. We're forcing ourselves to keep off those very unstable tones, yeah, the 4th and the 7th in the major scale. As I say, the minor is similar, slightly different, but the major is kind of what I'm using for an illustration here. The pentatonic keeps us off those tones and onto much more stable tones, particularly the 1st, 3rd and 5th degrees of the major scale and the 2nd and 6th, which are slightly less stable than 1, 3 and 5, but nowhere near as unstable as that tritone of the 4 and the 7. So that's why pentatonics are very safe and very powerful as an improvisational tool. They're almost always going to sound okay, as long as the chords you're playing them over are diatonic, naturally occurring in the key you're using. If you get non-diatonic chords, you kind of have to deal with it as you come. There may be some pentatonic tones that work depending on the diatonic chord, or you may have to make use of the 4 major scale, or you may have to use the scale of the key that chord is from. Okay, there are lots of different possibilities there, kind of beyond the scope of this tutorial. But almost always a pentatonic will sound okay. I say almost because you need to be a bit careful in 2 respects. First of all, if you play nothing but pentatonic in your kind of melodic improvisation, then it's going to start sounding a bit dreary after a while. Yeah, pentatonic is super useful, especially if you want a kind of a bit of a brain break, or you're dealing with a difficult section, because you can latch onto the pentatonic and it will sound safe. Okay, but don't do it all the time. The other thing that you need to watch out for is that some notes from the pentatonic over some diatonic chords can sound a bit clashy in some circumstances. Let me just illustrate that. Let's say we're still in C major and we're looking again at that chord progression I was using earlier. Now, when I played it earlier, I just played shell chords, but I'll play the basic chords now, and they were C, A minor, F, and G7. Okay, the 1, 6, 4 and 5 chords in the key of C major. It's a very, very common kind of looped chord progression. You can play it over and over and over and over again. Now, all of the notes of the pentatonic scale will work just fine over C, just fine over A minor, pretty much fine over F, even though we've got that unstable 4th degree of the scale down there. Doesn't really make it much difference. But when we get to the G7, we need to be a little bit more careful. Okay, maybe you can see why. That's because we've got that B in there, that very unstable tone. And in particular, if we play the tonic of the pentatonic in the right, we get a little bit of a clash. Okay, now you've got a couple of options there. First, well, 3 options probably. First of all, you can just stay away from it. You can use the other notes of the pentatonic and stay away from the C when you're over a G7 chord. Or you can kind of embrace it and say, yeah, that's the sound I'm after, and that's fine. There's no rule against doing that. Or you can, and kind of, maybe this addresses part of the question that Rob was asking, you can lift out the kind of clashing tone down here and do what I did when I was playing the shell chords. Okay, and that should slightly improve, you know, that apparent clash. Okay, as I say, don't worry about it too much, and don't get too obsessed about which notes you can play over which chord. The thing to do is to play around lots and improvise and practice lots, and that way you will kind of gradually learn where things sound cool and where they don't. Okay, don't obsess too much about the rules. First and foremost, think about the sound. So in answer to Rob's question, can we play non-pentatonic notes in our left-hand chords if we're soloing on a pentatonic in the right? The answer is yes, and in fact most of the time you won't have much choice, because most songs contain chords that rely on non-pentatonic tones. The thing to remember is that in Western music, in pop and jazz and so on, really we're just borrowing the pentatonic kind of as an ingredient that we can mix into our music, first of all for its particular sound, but also because of those characteristics that make it very safe and very reliable for improvisation. Okay, so there we go. Rob, I really hope that's answered your question. If any of the rest of you have any questions, feel free to ask. Just stick them in the comments underneath any of my videos. I always try to answer every question, but when I come across a good one, I'm going to try and make little tutorials out of them. As I always say, if you're not subscribed to the channel, just hit the button down there in the bottom right hand corner. You know, get free updates of my tutorials as and when they come out. And please do check out my book, How to Really Play the Piano, the Stuff Your Teacher Never Taught You, which covers kind of the basics of harmony and music theory, kind of in a way that's relevant to pop and jazz and blues and those kind of styles. Yeah, so you need to be able to read a little bit of piano music, basic right and left hand, but if you can do that, then you should get a lot out of the book. There we go. Check out my Patreon crowdfunding campaign, patreon.com/Bill Hilton, and please do follow me on Facebook and Twitter. All the links are in the description text underneath this tutorial as usual. Okay, there we go. I'll see you next time.